Hello everybody, and welcome to another game design video. In this video, what makes a game fun, is going to be a slight response to my actual topic from last week, but it's actually a little more of a sort of synergy of a lot of thoughts that people shared in some great responses and comments that made me think about maybe some elements of game design and gameplay that are often underappreciated in making a game fun. But I think they're actually at the root of not just what makes a game fun once, but what keeps a game fun over time and makes you want to keep coming back to it. So what are those two elements? Those two elements are suspense and surprise. I think these are two very important things, and I think they're two things we don't often think about when we talk about game design and when we think about the games we play. And I hope that by the end of this video, you agree with me that they're pretty important. So when I say suspense, you probably think of this guy, Alfred Hitchcock, who made a lot of very famous and quite good suspenseful movies. If you're a bit more of a nerd like me, you might also think of something like that. Little tales of suspense, some classic comic books of suspense. If you're a little less of a nerd and into more pop culture, maybe you think of something like that. As that show lives and dies by creating suspense, right? Who gets that rose? So suspenseful. So what is suspense? Well, it's a state or feeling of excited or anxious uncertainty about what may happen. I promise I won't read you every slide, but it's a pretty accurate definition. In other words, there's a set of possible outcomes, and you don't really know which one is more likely. Or even, perhaps you know which one's more likely, but you don't know which one it is, which one's going to happen for sure, right? And look at these people in this little clip art. They're clearly watching some kind of suspenseful movie, right? But look at their body language. They're leaning forward, their eyes are wide. These are people engaged in the movie. I'm going to guess these people aren't watching Lincoln. They're watching something suspenseful. They're forward. They're dialed in. They care about what's going on. And that's the key. Suspense creates engagement. You don't want to pull away for a minute. You don't want to stop whatever it is you're doing, right? Because you don't know for sure what's going to happen. So how do we create suspense? Well, games that create suspense, my argument there from the last slide is that they create engagement. You care about what's going on because you're not sure what's going to happen one moment to the next. And in general in games, the most common tool employed, especially in things like war games, is randomness, right? Dice. That's a set of possible outcomes, 2 to 12 from these two dice rolling. And yeah, there are likeliness to the outcomes, but you never know what's going to happen. Even though there's this law of averages, those averages are only true if you roll the dice 10,000, 20,000 times. Any one individual roll, less likely or not, we've all gotten the snake eyes when we absolutely need them, and we've all gotten the box cards when we absolutely don't, right? And the possibility of that creates suspense. It creates engagement. Ah, Willy Wonka, so wise. And his little quote here of "the suspense is terrible, I hope it'll last," is one of the more genius things said by any movie character, and unbelievably cogent to this talk. Because suspense is terrible. It's exactly what he's saying. It's absolutely terrible. You're agitated. You don't know what's going to happen. You might win. You might lose. You might die. You might live. You might whatever. It's terrible. It's being uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's this state of excited, engaged agitation that's just wonderful. And it makes for greatness in a game. And exactly like Willy Wonka here, we should all be hoping it'll last. The problem is that we often don't. We often seek to not make it last. We aim for predictability. And I like Eleanor Roosevelt's quote here that if life were predictable, basically it would suck. If she said it a little bit better than that. But there's really a lot of truth in that. And just like in life, a game gets just as rote and without flavor and boring when it becomes predictable. But yet, that's exactly what we're going for. Often when we play a game, when we design a list or try to win at something, especially competitively, we want consistency, right? Consistency is key. You hear this all the time. But consistency is boring. Consistency is key because it's great for producing a certain number of widgets in a year for a business. But that's not exciting. That's just, a good way to probably turn a profit for your shareholders. Not exactly great for a game design principle. This is predictability, right? Predictability where you know that it's going to be one of the 5 characters you introduced. The monster isn't real. They're going to pull off his mask. It's going to be Old Man Witherspoon. This is predictability in action, right? And as fun as Scooby-Doo is, no one would accuse it of creating a high level of suspense or engagement. The other key is surprise. So suspense keeps you agitated. You don't know what the outcome is. But surprise is something wholly different, right? What is surprise? It's that. That's surprise. Surprise is the pool shark. No one ever sees pool shark coming. Yes, indeed. That's surprising. Either it wasn't on your radar as a possibility at all, or it was very, very unlikely. Okay? Surprise happens after the sort of triggering event, whereas suspense is something leading up to it. For something to be surprising, it can't be one of the likely or known outcomes, right? In this little example I give here, death is not surprising. In fact, it's equally likely with living. It has to be unexpected. That's the key to the creation of surprise. So when we look at this through the lens of a war game, what we need is a set of very unlikely outcomes that can occasionally happen, but greatly impact the game, right? We need our pool sharks, those things that are uncommon and can just sort of happen unexpectedly, all right? So when we think about that, that means that excitement is sort of this two-dimensional thing, right? It requires surprise and suspense. As I mentioned, though, our usual goal, especially in things like war games, is to get rid of those as much as possible, to make things sort of predictable. No suspense, lower the suspense as much as possible. Definitely minimize the chance of surprise. But of course, what we want is a nice combination of suspense and surprise, right? That makes great movies, and that makes for a great and engaging game. If you walked into one of these movies and the Statue of Liberty was in the first scene, or you knew Bruce Willis was a corpse, spoiler alert from a movie that's 20 years old, they would be much worse movies, right? So, predictability, part 2. The problem with suspense and surprise, and many of you might already be saying this, is that they themselves can become pretty predictable. If you write them into the game where they're just sort of happening, or if we're expecting to be surprised at every turn, what do we get? Well, what we get is something that starts looking like this. We get some crap. We get something that gets so rote that it becomes uninteresting, right? So these tools, when used, have to be used in a very measured fashion. If they become predictable, then the engagement's gone, and, well, you make some bad movies with, I would say, diminishing box office returns, but also you make a bad game that you don't want to come back to. So what's the recipe for the best game? And I put a big question mark after that because I don't know that you can really ever define that term. That's such a wildly wacky term to say best. But what I'll say makes a game very fun is that the game allows for a pretty even amount of suspense throughout, maybe with some rises and falls, but allowing for surprises to happen at sort of regular but not common intervals, where you never really see them coming, right? They're like pool sharks. You'd never see them coming. And that creates a sense of engagement throughout the game where you both don't want you're constantly dialed in, and things can happen that create memorable moments, those surprising moments that you're going to talk about and tell your friends about years later. This time I played the game, this happened and this, and I had units all around me and I had to stick on a 2 and I did, and then the next turn, whatever, right? Those are those moments of surprising things that that make the game really great and make it memorable. The more predictable, the more rote the experience, the lower the desire to continue playing. So in game design, we use a combination of randomness and variance, right? So different choices and different sets of abilities that, when interacting with the randomness, create the emergent property of fun. So that's my argument. I hope you agree with me, or at least found this remotely interesting. And I hope that maybe next time you play your game, whatever it happens to be, war games or otherwise, you think about the role that suspense and surprise are playing in that game to make it fun and interesting and make you want to keep coming back to that table and play it again. And this is a picture of a banana, which I'm guessing is also surprising. What a twist. See you next time, everybody.